The chair was empty. That was the first thing the council chamber's automated record system logged at 0900 hours on the morning of the surrender directive, not the vote, not the deliberations, not the historic weight of what 41 species had just decided. The first logged anomaly was a single empty chair at the human diplomatic table, in a chamber where every other species had sent at least a senior representative, and the absence had a specific quality to it that the chamber's veteran security coordinator, a Velhari named Dreshmira, would spend the following weeks trying to articulate in her incident report. The chair wasn't empty the way a chair was empty when someone was late. It was empty the way a chair was empty when whoever belonged in it had decided, with full information and deliberate intention, to be somewhere else entirely. The human delegation's secondary attaché, a young man who introduced himself as Cadet Officer Wren and who appeared to be approximately 22 years old by human reckoning and who had the specific expression of someone performing composure rather than possessing it, sat 2 seats away from the empty chair and said nothing. He had said nothing for the entire 3-hour session. He had taken notes. Extensive notes, handwritten on physical paper, in a script that the chamber's translation systems couldn't read because it wasn't any registered language, a personal shorthand of some kind, which in itself was not unusual for junior diplomatic staff. What was unusual was the speed at which he wrote. He had been writing continuously from the moment the session opened, and Dreshmira, watching from her security position, had the distinct impression that he was not recording what was being said. He was recording something else. She didn't know what. She didn't know where the human ambassador was. She didn't know why the most consequential session in the council's recent history had been attended by a junior attaché with a notepad instead of a senior diplomatic presence. Those were 3 questions. The 4th arrived at 1100 hours, when the surrender directive vote concluded, 38 in favor, 2 abstentions, 1 against, the single dissenting vote cast by the Thani Collective in a move that would later be studied by every political science program in the galaxy, and the Chamber's automated announcement system prepared to transmit the formal directive to all registered diplomatic channels. The transmission to the human diplomatic channel failed. Not a technical failure. The system logged it correctly, delivery refused, channel closed from receiving end. The human diplomatic channel had been closed before the vote concluded. Before the directive existed. Someone on the human side had closed it in anticipation of a message they had known was coming, and had decided not to receive it. Ambassador Elena Vasquez was, at the moment the surrender directive vote concluded, in a room that did not appear on any official map of the council station. This was not because the room was secret, exactly. It was because the room was classified under a station infrastructure category that nobody in the council's administrative apparatus had thought to monitor diplomatically, because the category was Atmospheric Systems Maintenance Junction 7 Delta, and the beings who managed station atmospheric systems were not typically conducting meetings that required diplomatic oversight. Elena was 47 years old, and she had spent 23 of those years in interspecies diplomatic work, and the thing that had made her effective in that work, the thing that had produced, over 2 decades, a reputation that meant she was either the first call or the last option depending on how badly things had already gone, was a quality that she had never found a satisfactory word for in any language she spoke. The closest approximation in Galactic Standard was something like operational patience. The willingness to let things develop further than was comfortable before deciding what to do about them. The ability to sit with incomplete information and resist the pressure to act before the picture was sufficiently clear. And the specific, disciplined capacity to see several steps further than the current conversation while appearing to be fully present in the current conversation. She had known the surrender directive vote was coming for 6 weeks. She had known the final vote count within 2 of the actual result for 4 weeks. She had spent the preceding 6 weeks in a series of conversations that did not appear in any diplomatic log, with a series of individuals who did not appear in any official registry, in a series of locations that did not appear on any official map. The atmospheric maintenance junction was the last of those conversations. The person across from her was a Velhari named Soa Kareth, who held the official title of Station Infrastructure Operations Supervisor and the unofficial title of the person who knows where every pipe, wire, and data conduit on the station runs, which was, Elena had determined 4 weeks ago, a significantly more useful thing to know than the official title implied. The directive transmits in approximately 90 seconds, Soa Kareth said. She was not comfortable with what she was doing here. Elena had noticed this and had made a deliberate decision not to address it directly, because addressing discomfort directly sometimes resolved it and sometimes calcified it, and with Soa Kareth, Elena had assessed the latter was more likely. I know, Elena said. Your channel is closed. Yes. When they realize the channel was closed before the transmission, they're going to ask why. They're going to ask a lot of things, Elena said. That's one of the smaller ones. Soa Kareth looked at her. Ambassador, she said. What are you doing? Elena looked at the maintenance junction schematic on the display between them, the complete data routing architecture of the council station, which Soa Kareth had shown her 3 weeks ago in a conversation that had begun as an infrastructure consultation and had become, over 90 minutes, something considerably more significant. The directive requires formal receipt to become binding under the council charter, Elena said. Article 7, Section 4. A directive that is transmitted but not received within the acknowledgement window is classified as a failed delivery and requires reissuance through secondary channels. Soa Kareth stared at her. The secondary channel process takes 14 days. Minimum, Elena agreed. You're buying 14 days. I'm ensuring that the council's own procedural requirements are met correctly, Elena said, which is my function as a diplomatic representative. I take procedural compliance very seriously. The silence in the maintenance junction had a specific quality. That's not what you're doing, Soa Kareth said. No, Elena agreed. But it's what I can demonstrate I'm doing if someone asks. What are you actually doing? Elena looked at the schematic. In 14 days, she said, the secondary channel process will deliver the directive to our acknowledged receipt system. At that point, we will have no further procedural options for delay. She paused. So whatever needs to happen in the next 14 days needs to happen in the next 14 days. What needs to happen? Elena looked at her. That, she said, depends on some things I don't know yet, which is why I need to know where the data conduits run. Soa Kareth looked at the schematic. At the routing paths for council chamber communications, administrative systems, diplomatic channels, and the 17 other data infrastructure categories that kept the station functioning. You said 3 weeks ago that you needed to understand the station's information architecture for security reasons, she said. Yes, Elena said. That was true. Partially, Elena said. The security reasons I described were real. They were not the only reasons. Soa Kareth sat with this. I'm an infrastructure supervisor, she said. I'm not a political actor. I know, Elena said. And I'm not asking you to be one. I'm asking you to help me understand the station's physical architecture. You've already done that. She paused. What you do with the knowledge that you've done it is your decision. The silence again. If this goes wrong, Soa Kareth said, and it comes out that I showed you. It won't come from me, Elena said. And the information I've used in ways that are technically within my diplomatic mandate. Unorthodox, but within. She met the Velhari's eyes. I have spent 23 years making sure that the things I do are within the lines. Not always the lines people expect, but within the lines. Soa Kareth looked at her for a long moment. What happens if you succeed? She said. That depends on what you mean by succeed, Elena said. The directive is intended to prevent a war, Soa Kareth said. That's what 38 species voted for. If you undermine it. I know what they voted for, Elena said quietly. I was there when the logic was built. I know exactly which parts of it are correct and which parts are based on an assessment of humanity's current position that is, she paused. Incomplete. Incomplete how? Elena looked at the schematic. I'll know in 14 days, she said. Cadet Officer Wren's name was not Wren. This would not become clear until later, when the Council's Security Division ran the background check that should have been run before his credentials were processed and discovered that the identity behind the name had been constructed 11 months ago, carefully and completely, with the specific attention to detail of someone who had done this before and knew which gaps in the verification system needed filling. His real name was Marcus Osei, and he was 26 years old, and he was not a cadet officer. The title he actually held was one that existed in exactly one document in the human government's organizational structure, a document classified at a level that meant the number of people who had read it could be counted on one hand. The title was Strategic Intelligence Coordinator, Special Diplomatic Operations. What this meant, in practice, was that he was the person Elena Vasquez sent into rooms when she needed eyes and ears in rooms she was not in. He had been in the council chamber for 3 hours and had filled 17 pages of his personal shorthand. The shorthand was not a personal notation system. It was a cipher that he and Elena had developed together over 4 years of working in environments where communication security was not guaranteed, and which encoded information at a density that allowed him to compress a 3-hour multilateral session into 17 pages that could be transmitted in a burst communication small enough to pass as routine background traffic. He transmitted it to Elena at 1,107 hours, 6 minutes after the directive vote concluded. She received it at 11:09. She read it in the atmospheric maintenance junction while Soakareth watched with the expression of someone who had agreed to be present and was reconsidering the wisdom of that agreement. The Ethani voted against, Elena said. You knew they would, Marcus said through the comm he was speaking quietly, in a stairwell outside the council chamber, with the slightly compressed tone of someone managing multiple things simultaneously. I knew they might, she said. There's a difference. She read further. The Velhari abstained. Both of them, he said, which is interesting because their internal vote before the session was split. She looked up from the transmission. Their internal vote was supposed to be confidential. I know, he said. She paused. Marcus, she said. How do you know the Velhari internal vote? A brief silence. One of their junior attaches takes lunch in the same place every day, he said, and has very strong feelings about the compact's handling of the Rethalai situation, which she was willing to discuss with someone sympathetic. And you were sympathetic. Genuinely, he said. I have actual feelings about the Rethalai situation. She made a note. The abstentions change the arithmetic, she said. Yes, he said. 38 in favor is a majority but not the supermajority required for enforcement authorization. The directive passes. Enforcement authorization fails. Which means the directive is advisory, she said. Which is not nothing, he said. No, she agreed. It's not nothing. But it's different from what they thought they were voting for. The silence on the line had the quality of two people who have worked together long enough to communicate in the gaps between sentences. Elena, Marcus said, the abstentions weren't accidental. No, she said. Did you? I had conversations, she said, with people who had concerns about the enforcement authorization mechanism. I listened to their concerns. I shared some relevant information about the current tactical situation. Information that suggested enforcement authorization might produce outcomes that the abstaining parties found undesirable. Information that accurately represented the current tactical situation, she said, which I had access to and they did not, because not everyone reviews the same briefings. Another silence. The briefings you're referencing, he said, are those the ones you're not supposed to have? I'm supposed to have them, she said. I am the senior human diplomatic representative. My mandate includes access to current tactical assessments. The pause. The question of whether the council understood that my mandate included that access is a separate question. They didn't know you had those briefings, he said. They didn't ask, she said. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. 14 days, he said. What do you need me to do? Keep the notes, she said. Keep talking to people who have strong feelings. And find out everything you can about the current position of the Ethani diplomatic delegation's senior strategic advisor. Why specifically? Because he voted against, she said. Which means he knows something or believes something or has access to something that 38 other species representatives don't. And I want to know what it is. She closed the transmission. Soakareth was looking at her. You had conversations with the abstaining parties, Soakareth said. Yes. Before the vote. Yes. which produced abstentions instead of votes in favor, which removed the enforcement authorization from a directive that 38 species voted for. The enforcement authorization was removed by the Charter's supermajority requirement, Elena said, which has been in the Charter for 400 years. I didn't write the Charter. You used it, Soakareth said. I operate within it, Elena said, which is my job. The Velhari infrastructure supervisor looked at her for a long moment. I need to ask you something, she said. And I need you to answer it honestly, because I have been helping you for 3 weeks and I am still not certain I understand what you're trying to do. Ask, Elena said. Is humanity going to win? Soakareth said. Whatever this is, the war, the conflict, the situation the directive is trying to address. Is humanity going to win? Elena was quiet for a moment. Not the pause of someone who didn't know the answer. The pause of someone choosing how honest to be. We're not going to lose, she said. That's not the same thing. No, she agreed. It's not. What Soakareth did not know, what the Council's full chamber did not know, what the 38 species who voted for the surrender directive did not know, because the briefings they had access to were the briefings that had been prepared for them, was what the current tactical situation actually looked like. Not from the Compact's assessment perspective. From the ground. The conflict that had produced the surrender directive was the result of a border dispute in the Kepler corridor that had escalated, over 7 months, into something that nobody had managed well. The Compact's briefings on the subject described a human military force that had been pressed back from its initial positions, that had sustained significant losses, and that was currently in a strategic position that the Compact's analysts assessed as, the phrase they used was untenable within 90 days. The Compact's analysts were correct about the positions. They were incorrect about what the positions meant. Elena knew this because she had access to a document that the Compact's analysts did not, a supplementary field assessment filed by the Joint Tactical Coordination Division 14 days before the vote, written by a human officer named General Yusuf Adebayo, which was not in the standard briefing package because it had been filed in the wrong administrative category by a junior staff member who had used a legacy system code by mistake. The document had been retrieved from the wrong category and flagged to Elena's office because the flag system automatically routed anything filed under Adebayo's name to the senior diplomatic representative for human affairs, since he was the theater commander and his assessments were diplomatically relevant. It had arrived in her inbox on a Tuesday afternoon, and she had read it, and she had understood immediately that the document's existence was the thing that changed everything. The wrong category filing had been a mistake. Elena had made a deliberate decision not to correct the mistake. Because if the document was in the wrong category, it was not in the standard briefing package. And if it was not in the standard briefing package, the Council's analysts had not read it. And if they had not read it, the assessment they had used to justify the surrender directive was based on incomplete information. Specifically, the Compact's assessment described the human tactical position as untenable within 90 days based on a supply chain analysis that assumed static defensive positioning. Adebayo's assessment described the tactical position as designed to appear untenable, and then spent 40 pages explaining why. General Yusuf Adebayo was 63 years old, had spent 4 decades in human military service, and had the specific quality of strategic mind that was rare enough to have a name in military theory but common enough to be recognized on sight by anyone who had served alongside it. He was a practitioner of what human military history called operational deception at scale, the art of constructing a tactical situation that looked, from the outside, like the situation you wanted your opponent to act on, while the actual situation was something else entirely. He had been doing it in the Kepler corridor for 7 months. The positions that the Compact's analysts had assessed as untenable were not positions humanity had been pushed into. They were positions humanity had maneuvered into. The apparent supply chain vulnerabilities were not vulnerabilities, they were baited corridors. The retreats that the Compact's briefings described as losses were not losses. They were resets. The human force in the Kepler corridor was not losing ground. It was choosing ground. And in 40 pages of technical military analysis, Adebayo's document explained exactly where that ground was leading and why, And what was going to happen when the 90-day window the compact had identified as humanity's collapse timeline instead produced something that the compact had not modeled for? Elena had read the document 3 times. She had then done something that she knew was, technically, within her diplomatic mandate but that she understood would be received, if discovered, as a significant escalation. She had not shared the document with the Council. She had not corrected the filing error. She had instead made sure that the people voting on the surrender directive had access to the compact's incomplete briefing and not Adebayo's assessment, and had used the resulting incomplete picture to remove the enforcement authorization from the directive that the incomplete picture had justified. She had done this because the enforcement authorization, if it had passed, would have produced a Council intervention in the Kepler corridor at a moment when intervention would have disrupted the strategic geometry that Adebayo had spent 7 months building. One intervention at the wrong moment would have collapsed it. She had removed the enforcement authorization to protect the geometry. She had used the procedural closure of the diplomatic channel to buy 14 days of uninterrupted time. She had done all of this in a way that was, technically, within the lines. The lines had been very specifically selected. Marcus found the Ethani strategic advisor on the 3rd day. His name was Taithfall, and he was old even by Ethani reckoning. A century and a half of political and strategic experience compressed into a body that moved with the careful deliberateness of someone who had learned that speed was less important than direction. He was not in any of the places that senior diplomatic staff typically occupied during sessions at which their delegation had just cast a historic dissenting vote. He was in the station's public archive, reading. Marcus sat down nearby and read something too, because sitting down nearby and reading something was not remarkable. After 20 minutes, Taithfall said, without looking up, "You're the human who was in the chamber." "Yes," Marcus said. "You were taking notes." "Yes." "Not transcription notes," the old Ethani said. "Something else." "Personal notation," Marcus said. Taithfall turned a page. "The ambassador wasn't there." "No. But she knew the vote outcome." Marcus considered whether to answer this. "She had assessments," he said carefully. Taithfall looked up. His eyes were the deep amber of very old Ethani, the color that developed over decades like wood darkening with age. She had Adebayo's filing. The silence in the archive was very specific. "I don't know what you're referring to," Marcus said. "You know exactly what I'm referring to," Taithfall said. "The tactical assessment that was filed in the wrong category. The one the briefing package didn't include." He watched Marcus's face with the unhurried attention of someone who had been reading faces for longer than most civilizations had existed. The one that explains why the Kepler corridor positions means something different than the compact's analysts concluded. Marcus said nothing. "I also had access to Adebayo's filing," Taithfall said. "Not through the wrong category route. Through a different channel." He paused. "I voted against the directive because a directive based on an incomplete picture of the tactical situation is not a directive I can support, regardless of what 38 other species have decided." "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus said. The Ethani advisor looked at him with the amber eyes. "Because I want to know what the ambassador intends to do with 14 days and no enforcement authorization," he said. "And because I think, if she intends to do what I think she intends to do, there may be things I can contribute that she hasn't thought to ask for." Marcus looked at him. "What do you think she intends to do?" he said. Taithfall set down his reading. "She intends to let Adebayo's geometry complete," he said. "She's bought 14 days of clean operational space in the corridor. In 14 days, the secondary channel delivers the directive. At that point, if the geometry has completed, the strategic situation is different enough from what the compact's analysts assessed that the directive's justification no longer holds." Marcus said nothing. "The directive was issued to prevent a war," Taithfall said. "If the war's strategic situation changes sufficiently before the directive is formally received and binding, if humanity's position is no longer what the Council was told it was when they voted, the directive is directed at a situation that no longer exists." "Directives don't expire when the situation changes," Marcus said. "No," Taithfall said, "but they can be challenged at the reissuance stage." If the reissuance is contested by a member species with standing, on grounds that the factual basis of the directive has materially changed, the contestation process requires a new assessment. He paused. A new assessment would require access to Adebayo's filing. Which you already have, Marcus said. Which I already have, the Thani confirmed. And which, once introduced into the formal record, would require the 38 species who voted in favor to reconsider based on complete information. He looked at Marcus steadily. The directive was not wrong given the information the chamber had. It was wrong given the information the chamber should have had. Marcus sat with this. You want to contest the reissuance, he said. I want to give the council the opportunity to make a decision based on complete information, Taithfall said. Which is what I have wanted since the briefing package arrived without Adebayo's assessment, and I spent 6 hours trying to understand how a document filed 14 days ago by the theater commander had not made it into a briefing prepared 12 days ago. He paused. And then I understood. The wrong category filing, Marcus said. A mistake, Taithfall said. Or something that looked like one. The silence. What do you need? Marcus said. From you? Nothing, Taithfall said. From the ambassador, I need to know if she is willing to have the contested reissuance work as I've described. Because my role in it requires knowing that the geometry will complete in 14 days. She doesn't control the geometry, Marcus said. Adebayo does. No, Taithfall said. But she chose not to share his assessment. Which means she believed it was worth protecting. The amber eyes. Which means she believed it would complete. Marcus looked at the old Ethani for a long moment. Then he opened his communications device. Let me make a call, he said. Elena took the call in the atmospheric maintenance junction, which had become, over the preceding 3 days, something between a temporary command post and the one location on the station she was confident was not monitored. She listened to Marcus's summary. She asked 3 questions. She was quiet for a moment. He's right, she said. About the geometry. About the timeline. About the contestation mechanism. She paused. Ask him what he wants in return. A brief silence while Marcus relayed the question. He came back. He says he wants to be in the room when the council is shown the complete picture. He wants it on record that the Thani descent was correct. That's all. He says, a civilization that is right and silent is indistinguishable from a civilization that is wrong. I am not interested in being indistinguishable. Elena looked at the schematic of the station's data architecture. Tell him yes, she said. And tell him, the room he wants to be in. I know where it is. It's not the council chamber. Where is it? She looked at the routing paths on the schematic. At the place where all the station's data conduits converged before they distributed out to the individual diplomatic channels, the administrative systems, the public broadcast infrastructure. The place where, if you had access to it, you could introduce information into every channel simultaneously. The place that Soa Kareth had shown her 3 weeks ago because she had asked to understand the station's information architecture for security reasons. It's a maintenance junction, she said. I'll send him the coordinates. Day 11. 3 days before the secondary channel delivery window. The signal from the Kepler corridor arrived at 0340. Elena was awake. She had been awake for most of the preceding 11 days in the way of someone who has built a structure with a specific completion date and is maintaining the structure until it either holds or doesn't. She read the signal once. She sat with it for a moment. Then she opened the channel to Adebayo. General, she said. Ambassador. His voice had the quality of someone who had also not been sleeping much, for different reasons. You've seen it. Yes, she said. The geometry is complete, he said. 3 days ahead of the window. I know. What happens now? She looked at the routing schematic. Now we make sure the council sees it, she said. You can do that? I have access to the distribution architecture, she said. And a Velhari infrastructure supervisor who knows where the conduits run, and an Ethani advisor who wants to be in the room when the council sees the complete picture. The pause. Elena, Adebayo said. If this works, if the contestation holds and the directive is reconsidered, the council is going to understand what you did. All of it. The channel closure, the abstentions, the document in the wrong category. Yes, she said. Is that a problem? She thought about it honestly. It's a consequence, she said. How serious a problem it is depends on whether the complete picture changes the council's assessment. And if it does, he said, then the thing I did was protect a strategic situation that proved decisive, she said. Which is my mandate. And if it doesn't? Then I bought 14 days that weren't sufficient, she said. And the directive stands, and I face the consequences of having delayed it. The silence on the channel was the silence of a general and a diplomat who had each spent decades learning the specific quality of situations that could go either way. Do you think it changes their assessment? He said. She looked at the signal from the corridor. At the tactical reality that was now, after 7 months of design-to-look untenable positioning, something entirely different from what 38 species had voted on. Yes, she said. I think it does. You sound certain. I'm not certain, she said. I'm proceeding as if I am, because the alternative is not proceeding, and not proceeding was never the option I was considering. She heard him exhale. All right, he said. What do you need from me? The full tactical assessment, she said. Current status. Everything that's changed since the filing. I'll send it in the next hour. Send it to the routing address I'm about to give you, she said. Not to my diplomatic channel. The pause. Where am I sending it? She gave him the coordinates of Maintenance Junction 7 Delta. She gave him Soacaratha's authentication code, which Soacarath had given her a week ago for a reason that the infrastructure supervisor had described to herself as infrastructure access and that she probably understood, by now, was something slightly more than that. She closed the channel. She looked at the empty space where the empty chair had been 3 days ago in the council chamber. She thought about what the council's security coordinator had probably put in her incident report about that chair. She thought about Taithval wanting to be in the room because a civilization that is right and silent is indistinguishable from one that is wrong. She thought about Marcus's 17 pages of cipher notes, and the Velhari attaché with strong feelings about the Rethali situation, and Soakarath looking at her across a maintenance junction schematic and asking, "What are you doing?" She thought about 41 species in a chamber, 38 of them voting based on a picture they had been given that was incomplete, 2 of them abstaining because something in the available information hadn't added up, 1 of them dissenting because he had found the missing piece and understood what it meant. She thought about Adebayo's 40 pages. She thought about 7 months of choosing ground. And then she stood up, and she sent the coordinates to Taithval, and she walked to the junction where Soakarath was waiting with access to every data conduit on the station, and she began the work of making sure the council saw what it needed to see. The broadcast reached every diplomatic channel, every administrative system, and every public communications interface on the council station simultaneously at 0630 hours, 11 days after the surrender directive vote. It was 47 minutes long. It was Adebayo's original assessment, updated with 11 days of current tactical data from the Kepler corridor, narrated in Galactic Standard by a voice that several council members later reported they could not immediately identify, and that the station's audio analysis systems identified as human but could not match to any registered diplomatic personnel. It was narrated by Elena. She had recorded it in the maintenance junction, with Soakarath managing the technical distribution and Taithval sitting in the corner reading and occasionally noting when a technical military term required additional context for a galactic audience. The content of the 47 minutes was the complete picture, not humanity's position as the Compact's analysts had assessed it from the available briefing materials. Humanity's actual position. In the Kepler corridor. After 7 months. With the geometry complete. The picture was, by any military assessment, strikingly different from what had justified the surrender directive. Not because humanity had won. Because what the Compact's analysts had assessed as a collapsing defensive position was, in the full picture, the final phase of a strategic operation that had been running for 7 months, and the position humanity was now in was not the position of a species being pressed toward surrender. It was the position of a species that had spent 7 months making choices. The broadcast ended with a single sentence in Elena's voice, which was not dramatic and was not delivered as a pronouncement and which was, in its specific tone, more unsettling than either of those things would have been. The sentence was, "The Council was given incomplete information. This is the complete information. We invite reassessment." The secondary channel delivery of the surrender directive was due in 3 days. The contestation filing from the Fanny delegation arrived in 2. The reissuance session was attended by 41 species. The human diplomatic table had 2 people at it, Elena Vasquez, who had been at the station for the entire 11-day period and who appeared, to the Chamber's security coordinator, exactly as composed as she had been on the morning when the directive vote concluded and her chair had been empty, and Marcus Osei, whose identity had been quietly corrected in the official record as a matter of administrative accuracy and who was present in his actual capacity, which the Chamber's records now reflected correctly. Taithval was at the Fanny table. He had the filing in front of him. He had been waiting for this room for 11 days. Velron, the council chair, looked at the chamber before opening the session. He looked at Elena. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said, "before we begin, the council has questions about the events of the preceding 11 days. "I expected that," Elena said. "The diplomatic channel closure. Procedural compliance with the Charter's receipt acknowledgement requirements," she said. Article 7, Section 4. The directive was transmitted but not received within the acknowledgement window, triggering the 14-day reissuance process. I've prepared the relevant Charter citations if the Council wishes to review them. A silence. "The document that was distributed through station infrastructure this morning," he said. "A tactical assessment prepared by Theater Commander Adebayo and filed through standard military reporting channels," she said. "I provided it to the Council because it was relevant to the directive's factual basis, and because I understand the Council's interest in making decisions based on complete information." The document was not in the standard briefing package. "No," she said. "It was filed in an incorrect administrative category by a junior staff member. I became aware of it through my mandate's access to current tactical assessments. I should have flagged the filing error sooner. I regret the delay." The chamber was very quiet. "Ambassador," Velron said carefully, "the Council is not unaware that the preceding 11 days have been managed in a very specific way. The preceding 11 days have been managed in full accordance with the Council's own charter and procedural frameworks," she said. "I can provide documentation for every action taken." "That is not in question," he said. "Then what is in question?" He looked at her. She looked back. "The Council voted on a directive based on an assessment of humanity's current tactical position," he said. "The broadcast this morning suggests that assessment was incomplete." "Yes," she said. "If the assessment was incomplete, the directive's justification may not hold." "That is for the Council to determine," she said. "I am not the Council." "No," he said. "But you are the person who ensured the Council had 14 days in which to encounter the complete information." The silence. "Before we proceed," Velron said, and his voice had shifted from the official registrar's tone to something more direct. "I want to ask you something that is not in the session agenda." "Ask," she said. "The Council issued a surrender directive," he said, "to humanity, requiring acknowledgement and compliance." He paused. "You closed the channel before the directive could be received. You used procedural mechanisms to create a 14-day window. You used that window to distribute information that may significantly change the directive's factual basis." He looked at her steadily. "At what point in this process did you intend to comply with the directive?" The chamber was completely silent. Elena looked at him. She had prepared for many questions. She had, in her specific and characteristic way, anticipated the range of directions this session might go and had developed responses for each direction, with the patience of someone who had spent 23 years in rooms where the next question could be the one that mattered. She had not prepared a diplomatic answer for this one. She gave an honest one. "Velron," she said quietly, "I had a conversation, in the first 48 hours after the directive vote, with General Adebayo. He asked me what I was doing. I told him I was ensuring the council had access to complete information before the directive became binding. She paused. He asked me if I thought the complete information would change the council's assessment. I told him I thought it would. He asked if I was certain. I told him I was not certain. I was proceeding as if I were, because the alternative was not proceeding. The chamber waited. He then asked me what I would do if the information didn't change the council's assessment, she said. If the directive stood after the contestation. What did you say? Velron asked. I said, then we would comply, she said. And in complying, we would do it in a way that reflected what I know about the people I represent, which is that compliance under duress and compliance from genuine agreement are different things, and the council should know the difference between them if they are going to govern effectively. She looked at the chamber. I was not trying to prevent the council from exercising its authority, she said. I was trying to ensure that when the council exercised its authority, it did so with the complete picture. Because a directive that is correct is one I can bring to my government with full honesty about why it was issued. A directive that is based on an incomplete picture is one I would have to explain very differently. Velron looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Taithfall. The contestation filing is formally before the council, he said. We will proceed with a full assessment review. He paused. The directive is suspended pending review. He looked back at Elena. Ambassador, he said. For the record, if the review results in the directive being withdrawn, what is humanity's position on the continued Kepler corridor situation? Elena looked at him. General Adebayo's assessment includes a proposed resolution framework, she said, developed over 7 months of operational experience with the situation. It does not require surrender from any party. It requires negotiation from a position where both parties understand the actual tactical reality. She paused. We were always willing to negotiate. We were not willing to surrender based on an assessment that was wrong. You were not willing to accept a directive based on incomplete information, he said. No, she said. Even from this council. Especially from this council, she said quietly, because this council's authority derives from the quality of its decisions. A decision based on incomplete information is not a good decision, and I respect this council too much to let a bad decision stand when I have the means to provide the missing information. The silence in the chamber had a different quality now. That is, Velron said after a moment, either the most respectful or the most audacious thing anyone has said to this body in 40 years. I hope it is both, Elena said. The review took 9 days. The directive was withdrawn. Adebayo's resolution framework became the basis of the negotiated settlement in the Kepler corridor, which took 4 more months and was not clean and did not produce a result that every party was satisfied with, but produced a result that held, and that was based on what was actually true rather than what had appeared to be true from a briefing that was missing 40 pages. The Council's subsequent internal review of the events produced a report that spent considerable time on the question of what Elena Vasquez had done and whether it constituted a violation of diplomatic standards. The report's conclusion was that every action she had taken was technically within the applicable frameworks. It also noted, in a supplementary section that was added after the initial draft was reviewed by 3 senior council members who had been in the chamber, that the applicable frameworks had not been designed with the expectation that a diplomatic representative would use them with this degree of precision and intent. The report recommended a review of the charter provisions around directive receipt acknowledgement. It did not recommend action against Ambassador Vasquez. It did not have the standing to recommend such action, because everything she had done was within the lines. Taithfall, whose dissenting vote had been formally noted in the official record of the directive session and whose contestation filing had been the procedural mechanism that brought the complete picture before the council, submitted a brief personal statement to the archive. It was 2 sentences. Asterisk, a civilization that is right and silent is indistinguishable from a civilization that is wrong. The humans were not silent. Asterisk. So Akareth submitted her own record of the events in her capacity as Infrastructure Operations Supervisor, because the broadcast that went through station infrastructure required a maintenance log, and the maintenance log required an explanation of the authorization mechanism. The log entry was technically precise and operationally complete. It noted that the broadcast had been authorized under the station's Diplomatic Communications Access Framework, which permitted member species' senior representatives to utilize station infrastructure for diplomatic communications purposes. It noted that Ambassador Vasquez held the appropriate authorization. It did not note the 3 weeks of conversations in Maintenance Junction 7 Delta, or the infrastructure schematics, or the moment when Soakareth had asked "What are you doing?" and had not received a complete answer. In her private log, which she kept separate from official records, she wrote something that she did not intend to share and that she shared anyway 2 years later, when a researcher working on a study of the Kepler corridor situation found the log in an archive and asked permission to cite it. She had written, "I spent 3 weeks thinking I was helping a diplomat understand station infrastructure. I was helping her build something. I didn't understand what I was building until it was finished. And I'm still not sure I understand it completely. What I understand is this. She knew for 11 days that what she was doing might not work. She knew the council might review the complete picture and still vote for the directive. She knew she might face consequences for the channel closure, the broadcast, all of it. She did it anyway. Not because she was certain. Because the alternative was not doing it. I keep thinking about the empty chair. The morning of the vote, when the directive passed and the secondary channel transmission failed and every system in the chamber registered the receipt refusal, at that moment, she was in a maintenance junction, talking to me about pipe routing. She was already 3 moves ahead. I have worked on this station for 19 years. I have seen a lot of species manage difficult situations. I have not seen one that plans the way she plans, not from a position of certainty, but from a position of having already decided to proceed. I still don't know if that's courage or something else. I don't think courage is quite the right word for it. The right word might be something like refusal. The refusal to let the present moment be the last move. 38 species voted to end a situation. She declined to let it be ended. Not because she knew she would win. Because she hadn't lost yet.